Good afternoon and welcome to today's Dublin City of Learning talk and discussion entitled Inclusive Learning Settings, the Future of Education. We're coming to you today live from Marino Institute of Education in Dublin City, and we're all broadcasting live also and will be recorded for future generations to watch our enthralling discussion with three amazing panelists on that small but very important topic on the future of education. Today's event is being held as part of Dublin Learning City Festival of Learning. Dublin Learning City is committed to ensuring access to education and learning that is accessible and inclusive for every person. The Learning Festival brings this to life with an amazing array of activities organised over 3 days. Over 220 really engaging activities online and in person over 3 days. These range from discussions about education and direct provision, sustainable development and education, creative writing, and the creation of podcasts. As someone with a penchant for French bakery, I was particularly taken with the session on the creation of chocolate macaroons, and that's certainly going to add to my learning repertoire and take my learning to new heights. Our task today here at Marino Institute is to explore the development of learning settings and how we can reshape contemporary education and beliefs in education to influence the future of accessible and inclusive learning. It's framed by the challenges and opportunities that currently surround us with regard to pre-post, wherever we are with relation to COVID, also in relation to the ongoing war in Russia and conflicts and war across the rest of the globe, and also in relation to crises of the environment and environmental injustice. It is also framed, however, with the positive elements of online learning, intercultural dialogue, and other areas of development that ensure strong dialogue across numerous national and other boundaries across the world. So our task, as I have said, is to interrogate this relationship of the future of education, one that will be accessible and inclusive for all our learners. And that stands really central to what Dublin Learning City is about, which is ensuring that education and learning is inclusive and accessible for every person. It aims to empower and to promote and celebrate lifelong learning. And the three panelists that we have with us today are testimony to that and will speak in volumes to their experience across those areas. I'm going to introduce you now very briefly to our three panelists and allow them then to talk a little bit about themselves, to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about where they're currently situated and where they have come from with regard to their own learning careers and trajectories and the work that they are currently doing. We're joined immediately to my left by Denise McMurrow. You're welcome, Denise, who is the Student Engagement and Experience Manager at IADT and the co-chair of Dublin Learning City. We're also joined by Louise Lubungu, who is the Access Administrator at IADT, and we're also joined by Christy Wood, who's a sociology teacher in the Pathways Centre and the link person for pathways between prisons and universities in Dublin. To my three panelists, you are so welcome. We're delighted to have you here, and I'm looking forward to an engaging conversation with you. Maybe Denise, could I ask you maybe first just to tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you do, and how you have become involved in Dublin Learning City?
Thank you very much, Rory, and thank you very much for the very warm welcome introduction to us all. It's a great pleasure to be here in Merino Institute today, and I suppose a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when we got the cluster funding, there was a pot of funding made available to us, and we had every opportunity to apply for lots of different programs, but really what was in our focus and on our minds really significantly was the underrepresentation of learners in education. So we had a fantastic opportunity to explore how best to integrate more learners from underrepresented groups in higher education. So with that, we visited Cork, which was a learning city at the time, and we saw the fantastic work that they were doing in relation to having a learning city and to being a member of the UNESCO network of learning cities. So before too long, anyhow, we succeeded, first of all, in getting our funding, not alone for, I suppose, the Dublin Learning City, but also for 1916 bursaries, which enabled learners to potentially, who never maybe have thought of coming to college, to have an award of funding, 5,000 per year, on top of their other SUSI grant to come to college. And that was a huge milestone for us. And we also set about open learning in UCD, whereby potential students could learn for credit or not credit, which could mean that from any age, from literally an early school leaver right up to an actively retired person, they could go back to UCD to learn. And that was another fantastic project that we achieved. And also we set about creating a creative arts summer school, which enabled learners to go and taste, I suppose, what it would be like to walk through the doors of Merino Institute. What would it be like to go into Trinity College? What would it be like to come to IADT, the Institute of Art, Design and Technology, where I work, National College of Art and Design, and UCD, and we were now with the Royal College of Surgeons as well. So really this enabled participants to go and check out what it would be like to study there, check out different modules over the summer. And we had people literally, as I said, from 18 years of age right up to 65, 70. And this has been a fantastic project. But all in all, I suppose, why we set about creating Dublin as a learning city was to ensure that everybody felt included in education and that everyone felt that they belonged, because we realised that some people in the community felt maybe that wasn't for them, maybe they had a bad experience of learning, or maybe our education model didn't actually suit them. So we realised very quickly that one size didn't fit all. So with all our projects, we really knew that we were doing good work, great work. We still feel we do great work, I suppose we all do, work very hard to try and reach the most disadvantaged when it comes to going to third level. But we really felt we had to get out into the community. And by getting out into the community, we have now set up a learning neighbourhood. And we just launched that in Mountjoy Square yesterday. So it's very timely that we're here today, the second day of the festival. We now have 220 events, as you said. We won a UNESCO award for Dublin, and a big clap to everyone that made that happen, including Emer, who's here in the audience, Sean, who's not with us. And there are loads of people, I suppose, that made that happen, but in particular the learners made it happen, because we really understood and we really, I suppose, endorsed that whole concept of lifelong learning and equitable learning opportunities for all. And I think it's a great innovative approach to actually get into the community, and now to have 15 points in the North Inner City and 15 different facilities where people can actually go, have a sample of what's on offer. And it's those little building blocks that encourage people, I think, to come to third level eventually. And maybe third level mightn't be for everyone, but maybe, as you say, it might be that cooking, taste of whatever it is. It might be that little sample of that. It might encourage, it might be the turning point for people in terms of more positivity. And I myself am very committed to lifelong learning. I started out my career in Finglas back in the day. I have to say it's over 25 years ago. I hate to have to say it's over 25 years ago, but it is. And I suppose I saw how disadvantaged areas can be really caught in that web, and it's so difficult to break the cycle of it. But I'm so happy now that as a college representative that we are actually, and we've always done it, but we're really embracing the fact of going into the community and working with people where they're at at that point in time. Thank you, Rory.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's excellent to know a little bit of the background to where we've come to, and also the inspiration that Cork and other cities give to us, and that hopefully we can do to other cities into the future. So thank you really for really a lot for that. Maybe Lisette, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do in your own background?
Yeah, my name is Louise Lubungu. So I am working alongside with Denise. I'm working in the Access Office as an Access Administrator. So the work that we do in Access Office is just trying to kind of recruit non-standard students into third level education. So all the students that are underrepresented in third level education, and to try and give them the support that they need to kind of succeed and to have a good experience with learning again, depending at whatever stage that they are. So we have many kinds of bursary that we may give. Sometimes it depends. Denise was already talking about it, like the 1916 bursary, the Student Assistance Fund, and then now we have the University of Sanctuary as well that we have. So on reflecting on my own learning, I had many challenges that I had to overcome through my path of learning myself, because I came from Congo. When I came to Ireland, I was 13. That was about 25 years ago, something like that. Don't calculate my age. So I came 25 years ago in Ireland. I wasn't able to speak English, so the very first thing that I had to do was to learn English. But I was already put into secondary school and into my second year. So that meant like the following year I was doing my junior cert. Luckily, the junior cert went really well. I had no issue with that. I think my struggle started maybe in fifth, sixth year, when then I had to kind of make a lot of decision of what colleges I want to go to, what course that I wanted to do, because I was among the only person in my family that was speaking English, and that had a mere understanding of the educational system here in Ireland. So I didn't have the support of my family. I know that my family wanted me to go to college, but none of us understood what it took to actually come to college in Ireland. So after I'd done my Living Cert, I actually applied for colleges, a few colleges, and then I received the news that according to the status, the residency status that I had, I wasn't allowed to go to third level education. Well, it wasn't free for me. I had to pay not only the fees, the normal fees. At that time, I had to pay the international fees, which represented a lot to my family, about 10,000 per year, and I wasn't allowed. I wasn't able to kind of afford it. So then, from that time, it was already September, I guess, end of September. So I was kind of looking to do something. What am I going to do? It's already the end of September. I thought I was going to go to university, and then nothing was happening. So I kind of applied to other courses that I decided to pay myself, but unfortunately, because I still didn't have the guidance that I needed, those courses didn't went well for me. So because I knew how to speak French, and most of the people will kind of just support me into going into the area of maybe technology or customer service or call center, because you have a language, that's a strong point. So basically, so I decided then to kind of apply to these international companies that are settled here in Ireland. So that's how I began my employment with, I think at the time, UPS, and then Google, and all those international companies with the French that I had. Then it was at some point where I actually realized that like I wasn't going through any ladder. I wasn't getting any promotion that I needed to get, and I decided, okay, maybe it was due to the fact that I didn't have any degree or anything like that to support any promotion. So I decided that I was going to go back to university, and that was 10 years ago as a major student. So after deciding that, I also thought like that I will still pick the course that was related mostly to the job title that I had. So I thought like I would come back to university and study marketing or something like that. But luckily, I don't know, somehow when I was like looking at the university and everything, I saw that they had in Tala, IT, which was the university close to my to where I lived, that they had like an access course that was giving kind of an insight course of a little peek of every courses that were available. And then, so I decided to take part of this. It was a 10-week course. And I thank God that I actually took part of it, because I then discovered that it's not marketing that I wanted to do. I actually realized that I wanted to study social care. And this only came to me like a vocation, because I was like, oh my God, all my life I have been helping others, helping people in my community. And I was doing social care all the time, but I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do. So basically, finding my way back to college as a major student with the access course really helped me to kind of decide what I wanted and the kind of support that I needed. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and I think you've brought us into new space of thinking about some of the support services that we try to latch on to and we try to create, and I'd certainly like to hear a little bit more about those, because they are so important in what we do in third level. But I might come back to you on some of those actually, if that's okay. What I might ask now is Christy, fellow sociologist on the panel, to talk about us in your role, I suppose, Christy, in terms of your work with prisoners and the Prison Support Network, and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and that work, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Thanks very much as well for the invite.
So
yeah, I'm Christy Wood, and I teach sociology in the Pathway Centre. The Pathway Centre is an education centre in Parnell Square there in Dublin city centre. So we're under the umbrella of prison education. However, we do have students from the wider community as well. And obviously, because of our location being in Dublin 1 in the inner city, we would have a lot of people from the local area as well, and it would be kind of a disadvantaged area, and people with socio-economic issues, basically, especially in relation to education and adult and further education. So that's what I teach there in the Pathways Centre. But also, as I said, because we're part of prison education, we have links obviously then to the prisons, so people who would come on day release when they might be in the last maybe 6 or 12 months left of their sentence, and they may have been accessing education within the prisons, and they can come to us on day release and continue on with the courses that they have started, or just come out and start something fresh that we may have that's not an option for them on the inside when they are in prison. So it's really amazing, really, to know that this is an option really for people, and the difference that it makes for somebody to be able to access education and come out into the community and slowly reintegrate with society, I suppose, and also keep up a plan of what they may have been doing while they were in prison in relation to whatever course, or as I said, starting something new even and seeing other options, because that leans into then a lot of peer learning in Pathways, because somebody might come out from we have at the moment, we have women coming from the Docus Centre in Mountjoy, we have guys coming from the Progression Unit in Main Mountjoy, which is kind of the semi-open section of Main Mountjoy, and we have guys coming from Shelton Abbey Open Prison as well down in Arklow. So they come up on a daily basis. But when somebody comes, say, from any of those places, the peer learning happens because they would come in and see other people who have been come to us maybe 6 months, 12 months, and they're kind of further down the road, I suppose, in relation to the course they're doing or the plan that they have, or maybe they are going to go on to an access course or onto a degree or whichever it may be. And so that kind of peer learning just happens naturally itself, you know. We don't even have to really kind of mention it. It's really, they kind of inspire each other, really, you know. But to see people who kind of do come out on day release, maybe say for the first time, and whether they've been in for 6 months or 6 years, the difference in them really when, in say maybe even 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, you know, from just being in pathways and being around other people who are in a mature adult education environment and really kind of becoming themselves again, you know, where the label kind of slowly changes from the self-label and even, but the structural label of from the prisoner to the student, you know, and the difference that makes for individuals, like, and their families and the others in the community as well, like, it really is unbelievable to see, like, you know. So I'm lucky enough that part of my job is that I would go into the prisons and I would link in with all the prisons and their pre-release courses. So people, as I said, have maybe 6 months, 12 months left, and link in with them and see what they're interested in, whether they want to come to pathways or not. And from doing that, we realised that not everybody, as you said, like, wants or needs education. You know, people have a lot of individual needs and they may want employment, or they might just need housing, or maybe even a treatment centre or a mental health service or whatever it may be. And so from that, there was the Prisoner Support Network had existed before I worked in Pathways, which I've been there for about 5 years now, but it had kind of gone stale and quiet because people have moved around and stuff like that. So I decided to get it kind of going back up again. So the Prisoner Support Network is basically a voluntary organisation. It's a network of service providers from all around Dublin and around Ireland as well. So there will be 60 to 80 roughly different services involved. And as I said, we aim anyway to meet the multitude of needs that any one individual may have. As I said, so we had service from, as I said, addiction services, mental health services, education, training, employment, housing, welfare, healthcare, everything really. Because, as I said, from going inside and meeting people, and me kind of going in promoting pathways and talking about education, I realised that there's a lot more individual needs that any person can have. So from that then, if I go in now and link in with people, and I was in the progression unit in Mountjoy this morning, and I was talking to about roughly 20 guys, and it was the exact same thing. Some want education, some want employment, some need a treatment centre, some need a mental health service, some need accommodation, you know. So because of the Prison Support Network, I can then take a list of names, make phone calls and link people in with the relevant services that they actually need before they get released, you know, instead of waiting until afterwards, which has happened an awful lot, you know, where people would get released and they have no accommodation, they have no welfare, they have no doctor appointment, they have nowhere to live, and they're basically a lot of people end up just reoffending and going back to prison, you know, and recidivism kicks in then when the supports aren't in place. So that's also part of the role that I play as well in Pathways.
Okay, that's really interesting in terms of the tailored support required but also available then to make sure that prisoners can move beyond where they are. I really liked I just jotted down here this notion of almost transformative peer learning and the power of that. So this is the power of not necessarily schooling or qualifications, but education in the broadest sense and how that can work. The other thing I just picked up there off all three, and I think, Chrissy, you named it. You said, I'm lucky enough to do such and such as part of my job. And I think in education, that's something really important, that those of us who work in education always have part of our job that gives us real joy and pleasure. And it is in making those connections and helping people to transform parts of life, if possible at all. As I'm listening to all three of you discussing your own individual perspectives and the work that you do, a whole list of barriers, if we'll call those, to education, barriers to schooling, to third level, to broader education come up, very specific ones around prison, life in care, and then issues around language, first languages. You talked, well, I didn't speak English, but I did speak French and other languages as well. But the particular barriers that people face, the financial barriers, and also then the cultural Bourdieu, the cultural capital, the knowledge of how the system works. So you were supported, but maybe your parents didn't know how to support you through the processes. Having listed out some of those, are there any other key barriers that you would look at the education system today and go, that's a real key barrier for people making their way at whatever stage in life they are into education, staying in education, whether it is informal or informal? I'm not sure. Would anybody like to start us off maybe on just
I don't
responding?
mind if that's okay.
Sure.
It's just interesting that you mentioned Bourdieu there and the cultural capital, because I think one of the other major barriers is social capital, and we'd see that an awful lot from the guys coming out, especially not just from the wider community, but especially from prison as well, where somebody might have, say, a couple of level 5s in prison, say, for example. So academically, they are, adequate, let's say, in terms of education. And funny enough, the academia side of it is usually the least of the problem. Once they've already been doing courses already, when people do come out, it's the emotional and social supports that they struggle with mainly. That's what we really see, and that's why I was saying about any individual has a multitude of needs. Like any student who comes into Marino for the first time and does a course for the first time, they might have 7 A's in the Leaving Cert, for example, and they might come in here to do a course. Every single student has a multitude of other needs that they need. They need emotional support, they need social support, they need peer learning, the connectivity between lecturers, students, different groups of people, and that identity, and the labelling and the fitting in and stuff like that. They're all the major things that we see in relation to students coming out. Academia, inability aside, really, and then, so as I said, somebody could have a great academic record, but if they don't have those social and emotional supports in place, it'd be very, very difficult, And I know a lot of it is, of course, built around finance and the structural stuff as well, but still on a personal level for students, mental health stuff, anxiety, going from one space to another, maybe a secondary school to a university or a prison to a community-based education centre. There are massive changes from one institution to another that operate in completely different ways, and so those supports are really crucial, I think, for individual and also crucial, for any students.
Absolutely, and I think in a COVID world where it was difficult, in particular the social component, being able to touch, feel, care in that ways were really important, and we missed those, absolutely. I'm not sure, Lizette or Denise, do you want to come in on any of those, the other areas that maybe we need to pay attention to with regard to barriers or difficult?
I definitely agree with everything that Christy has said, and I really think self-confidence is a big thing for people, that they believe in themselves and that they feel that they belong wherever it is that they're going to, and that it's the right fit for them. So if they want to do it, and there's a willingness to do it, and they believe in themselves. But sometimes it's that self-belief that's missing. And I think it's all our responsibilities to help people to actually believe in themselves and to encourage them to say, yes, I can do this, and to be with them every step of the way. Because if they're not getting it at home, where are they going to get those supports? So I feel that we have a responsibility in our roles to make sure that we make it inviting for people to come and study with us. And if they don't want to come to us, then we go to them and we help them to make that leap, because it's a huge thing. And I've seen it myself, people maybe doing a short-term course, some recovering drug addicts, some ex-prisoners, and some people who haven't been engaged in education for years. And for them, sometimes the thought of going into a college might be the furthest thing away from them. But then when they actually do it, and I love the fact that Lizette mentioned like a foundation course or, some kind of an access program, a 10-week taster program, because I think that can be the deal breaker for people. And I've seen it where people have done short-term courses and they come in and maybe they feel they don't belong, maybe they have literacy, maybe they have IT issues, and often they do. So it's our responsibility to meet them and bridge those gaps. And after those 10 weeks, I've noticed that people can walk taller and they feel they belong. So that's the biggest observation I've had over my years, is the sense of self-confidence, feeling they belong, ensuring that we can encourage them to the belief that they can do it. And then once they get that belief and that continued encouragement, it makes their lives so much easier.
Absolutely.
I believe that the there's a lot of barrier right there to education, and there's also personal barrier that we all have ourselves on the way that we see ourselves through education. Like Denise was saying, we need to kind of be able to have self-esteem or the confidence that we are able to kind of do what we engage to do. And also I see a lot of social support that we need to be put in place, or that is already in place, that a lot of people will use. For example, myself, while I was going to education, in my education, I became actually homeless for 2 years. So the support service that was really important to me at that time was the pastoral service, which will be that's because I'm very spiritual. I am very in touch with spirituality, but like the equivalent will be what Carly does?
Oh, counselling.
Yeah, the equivalent will be counselling, I believe, and that service being available in higher education and free of charge is very important for a person to kind of be able to relate and speak through whatever problem that they could have, and know that like it's going to be non-judgmental, and that it's a safe environment to kind of talk. And that was really important for me to have that, and to be able to to focus and continue to know that, like, and also the belonging is also very important, because while I was going through homelessness, the fact that I stayed in college made me belong to the college. I felt that the college was a safe environment for me to be. It was kind of an escape zone for me, where it wasn't like all this homelessness or any other issue that was going on in my life wasn't really affecting me. In college, I was allowed to be just a student and study, as opposed to be a mom or to be a homeless or to be whatever other title that would be. Like in college, I was just a normal student studying and doing whatever courses that I was doing. So basically, yeah, I think everybody covered everything here. So the social barrier is very important, feeling belonging and having self-esteem and the confidence to do what you think that you're able to do.
Super, thank you so much. We are, as I said, coming from Marino Institute of Education today, and a lot of the work that we do here in the Institute is around educating educators, whether that's in early years education, primary, further education. From your experience, either professionally, personally, are there any key messages that you would have for educators? We've touched on maybe some of them, but we haven't really drilled down. Do you have any key messages for educators that you think they could bring into their practice to kind of disrupt some of the barriers that some people face as they move into and stay in education?
Yeah, if I may start, sorry. During my course of study, I was actually supporting a student with disability to be able to train and go to college. So we were going to the same college, but I was kind of note-taking, taking his notes and helping him during his exams and everything. So what I feel that educator could also do is actually to try to know the person better, the student, by knowing the student better, to find find non-conventional way to kind of to give tests or exams. For example, this person had intellectual disability, and he absolutely loved this course, and he knew exactly everything about this course, but asking him to kind of have the same test or written test as anybody else is a bit unfair on him, I felt. He could have just maybe done his test by recording a video or something like that, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to prove if there was any kind of learning. And to me, I think there's multiple ways to kind of find out if there's any kind of type of learning. I think sometimes we can go in a non-conventional way to find techniques to record learning, basically.
Okay, so it's a creative approaches to working with certain...
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a very good point that Lisette made, and in terms of universal design for learning, I think it's something that as educators we all need to embrace, because we all learn a different way, and at the end of the day we want people to maximise their own potential, whatever course that they decide to do. And I think we'll fail as educators if we don't embrace and embark on that universal design for learning, because one size, as I said before, doesn't fit all. So we need to work with the learners that we have. Obviously we have academic standards that we have to meet, so we're not talking about lowering the standards. We're talking about finding a way where that person actually excels in whatever the outcome is that we're asking them to achieve. So, we don't ask a fish to climb a tree. So, we ask a fish to swim in the water, a monkey to climb a tree. And if we keep that image in our head, then we maybe need to think about how we design our courses, how we have our buildings, all of that. But going back, I think something that struck me, Rory, when you asked the question was, how do we recruit our educators? How do we recruit our teachers? How do we recruit our lecturers? And do we keep going back to the same pot? And I think this is something that Merino Institute needs to clap themselves on the back on, because of all the different ways that you have of recruiting your teachers and how they're learning while they're here, because I know you do have innovative ways of reaching out to new target groups and how you're actually recruiting that pool of future teachers. Because if we keep recruiting the same teachers from the same backgrounds, then we keep with the same problem. I really believe we have to walk in the learner's shoes. In order to walk in the learner's shoes, we probably have to have come from all these different areas and backgrounds, because we're not all the same. So I think we think about how we are actually recruiting and how we're training our teachers and what experience we're giving them. And we need to, I suppose, delabel as well in time, I think, and destigmatise, where people are coming from should have nothing to do with their ability. And we all come from different areas, and people can come from maybe what other people might see as a disadvantaged area. But in that disadvantaged area, they might have fabulous communities where they really look out for each other. So instead of casting a judgment over where people come from, I think we should be just more open-minded about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Christy, do you want to come in on that in terms of...
There's not really much more to kind of say, I suppose, in relation, because it's well covered there, but I do think that kind of nearly what we were talking about earlier on, where I know there's a lot of kind of terms and kind of buzz phrases around education, like lifelong learning and learner-centred approach and stuff like that. But I do really believe that in order to kind of, suppose, aim for that at least, that it has to be more about the students. And I do understand that it depends on the setting and the education institution, because if you're teaching sociology, say, with 400 students, it's a lot more difficult to focus in on students' individual needs. Now, I know you would have tutorials and stuff like that, that can be broken down in different ways, and it would then, in that setting, maybe come more into the content, where there's a focus on equality and race and gender and all the important aspects of society and mental health and stuff that we know is existing that doesn't get spoken about arguably enough maybe in education. These issues could be brought into the content in larger groups, say, but then depending on our individual settings, like say for us, people coming from prison largely, or coming from inner city areas and going to a local education centre, for us, and the ethos in the Pathway Centre is a focus on, like what Denise was saying earlier on, but it's self-worth basically of the students, so like say for example, I teach sociology, so it's a level 5 course, whatever, and students come into the room, and I'd always ask them at the start of the courses to pick their own social issue and to just write a small piece on it, and let them pick the social issue. And they pick their own social issue, and for the next 6 to 8 weeks, whatever, we will be discussing that social issue, and they might come back with homelessness or addiction or whatever it may be. But for that next 6 to 8 weeks, they're giving me all the information about the topic that they've chosen. They're telling me all about it and why they've chosen it and where it happens and how it occurs and what they think the links are in society and all that type of stuff. And that would go on for weeks. And there's no books involved in that situation, you know, because what that is, that's giving the student a period of time, not only to kind of settle into the class and stuff like that, but they slowly build up their own individual self-worth, you know, because they're the owners of the information. They're the ones giving me all the information. We're discussing that within the group and stuff like that. And it might be only after 2 months that I might produce an article to say, do you know the way you were telling me about homelessness or addiction there for the past 8 weeks? Well, you won't believe it. This social theorist here here's an article where they've been saying the exact same thing. So that's really validating what you were saying, like, and then making those links, you know. And then, of course, usually what happens is then they're more in tune with the social theorist, instead of me coming in on week 1 and saying, today we're going to learn about Karl Marx and what he says about homelessness or social class, you know, and 90% of anybody would be like, boring, or not come back, you know. But it's just a different approach to it. But it's about the student. It's not about me. It's not about me trying to convey the information that I think I have. It's not about me trying to get them to listen to me. It's about the students, and whatever level they're at, and whatever way they learn. And of course we do all the blended stuff as well. But it's about the students, you know, and they'll get to their own place if you create the correct environment for them. And some of them might finish the course, and some of them might not. We don't have we're lucky enough that we're not dependent on funding. We don't need to put bums on seats to get funding for our next year. We're very lucky in that sense, because we're under the prison education umbrella. So because of that, our main focus isn't on getting so many bums on seats or getting certs the following June. We don't have groups of people who recruit them in September, send them off in June, with your cert, good luck. That's not our focus. Our focus is the self-worth and the individual potential for students, where they will take themselves to. And the irony of that is that we have a load of students and they end up getting a load of certs in June, but that's because they felt safe in that environment that we created for them, you know. So whatever way you go about it and whatever course you're doing, it's about the students, you know, and that's just the bottom line for us anyway, you know.
Sure, and I think that's really important what you've mentioned there in terms of freedom to be creative with your learners and not be under so much pressure all of the time to hit targets and those kind of markers that are very often built in as elements of funding. I was at a book launch last week. Kathleen Lynch Kathleen Lynch, who works in inequality studies, has a new book out around care and capitalism, and she was making very strongly that argument around the logics of the market and accountability and putting pressure on people to perform in particular ways, and it just doesn't work, and it ends up as carelessness. It just hurts rather than actually helps for many people who are on the margins for whatever reason of society. What I'm hearing coming across again and again is the importance of relationships, time, space, and respect for who the individual learner is and meeting them at that point on their journey. And I think that's a very powerful message. I know we have some questions in the audience. Time is slipping by really quickly, actually, in this conversation. We do have a number of questions in the audience, so I'd like maybe to pop down now. Does anybody have their first question? Yes. Okay, so just for everybody in the audience, it was, I suppose, to really drill down into what are the specific needs that a prisoner who leaves prison and moves on to the next part of their journey, what are the specific needs that need to be put in place to meet to support that person?
So, in my experience anyway, from working with people coming from prison and stuff like that, and working with people from the wider community returning to education, the needs for that student are the same for someone coming from prison, are the same needs that a student coming from secondary school going into university would have, except for they've come from a different environment that has had a different impact. So they need specific needs in relation to, as I said earlier on, the kind of social and emotional supports, to, like any student, if any student coming from one institution to another where there's a big change, apart from the structural and financial needs, as in accommodation, healthcare, welfare, financial support with SUSI grants and back to education allowance and maintenance grants or whatever it may be, there's individual social needs. Like, say, for example, just in relation to gender. So we have women coming from the Docus Centre and we have men coming from Main Mountjoy, for example. One man and one woman have completely different specific needs, as students moving into those from one space to another, because they're completely individual, or two women and two men. It depends on the person. There are the kind of umbrella of general needs, but when somebody is coming from, especially in an environment, arguably it's a harsh environment, being in a prison setting. So to come from that then, depending on the level of social integration and rehabilitation that may or may not have taken place, because it quite often may be where somebody comes out and very shortly gets out released in maybe June or July, and then they're starting college in September, and that's after. That could be somebody doing maybe in prison for a couple of years. That's a major change. It's like a trauma, arguably, and it's different for everybody, but it can be like a trauma for people going through that massive change, So just recognition of possible vulnerabilities and personal needs, and focus on that, I think, is like any student, really, I think is what is required most.
Can I just ask maybe a follow-up question on that, and I could ask it across? There are other questions, but you might forgive me in the audience just for a second. But in relation to that, so when a prisoner moves into third level or into wherever they move, is there often a sense that that person will hide the fact that they are a prisoner, that they won't want other students that they're working with knowing that? And then I'm also thinking from that on to other areas of identity, that some people just, no, I don't want other people to know that about me. I can't be authentically present here. I can't, because other people will judge me in a particular way, so I'm hiding that.
Yeah.
Is that something?
It's definitely an issue, for people. And as I said a bit earlier on, that's self-labelling as well, And again, of course, it's individual, because some guys or ladies might come out and they might be okay with the fact that they were in prison, and fully accepting of whatever it is they did to get there and the process they've gone through, and now they're moving on to college, and they might be fairly open about it. It depends where they are, I suppose, on the kind of personal and emotional journey in relation to their experience. However, a lot of other people might come out and never want to even mention it again, and don't even mention the word prison, and they just want to move on with their lives, and that's it, But in relation to, say, access and education and stuff like that, everybody who comes through us, we would always encourage them to, when on application or interview stage of going for the college course, to be completely open about your experience. Okay. Because for us, anyway, in our experience, and as I said, it's individual for each person that comes out, but for us, the experience is largely, even though there are negative connotations to a conviction and stuff like that, the experience is largely for that person can actually be used as a massive benefit to any college course, I would argue, or any new group, If somebody's coming, say, from prison and they're coming into your sociology lecture, and I think they would bring so much extra, or different, I should say, so much different stuff to the table, in relation to the learning and the experience that they've had, focus on social issues, We're talking about we should walk in students' footsteps and stuff like that. But then we should maybe be encouraging of embracing the experiences that individuals have had, whether we've had them or not as well, and realising that those experiences can be a real benefit,
In the learning space.
In the learning space. Yeah. And then after that, if students want to declare to other students whether they've had their own experience or not, that's completely up to themselves. But we would always encourage them to be open at application and interview stage, and we've never heard of one student having a negative experience from any third level institution when they've been open and honest about their experience.
That's really important to know.
Yeah, no, it is.
And of course it is very often on the individual, but that it's important to know for those individuals that this hasn't, for others at least, been a negative.
Absolutely.
And we see it in terms of ethnicity, in particular, some areas of disability where people don't maybe want to let or disclose or talk about. And I mentioned, or I picked up on something you said earlier about how lucky we are to do parts of our job, and one of the best parts of my job is going out to schools on school placement and seeing our students out on schools. And I was in a fabulous school in Finglas recently, primary school, and it's fabulous for a whole host of reasons, but one of the reasons it's fabulous is because as I was sitting down observing one of my students, one of the little girls came over to me and was so proud to tell me that she was a traveller and talked to me about her sight, and very at ease with that. And I felt the school is doing something brilliant where this is something that this person is really open and embracing and feeling proud of her ethnicity. And it is something that others don't have the possibility to do. And I'm not sure if Lizette or Denise, you want to come in on that, but in terms of how people can be authentically present themselves in learning environments.
Yeah, and I can see how, I suppose, that was very enlightening to experience that with that traveller girl, and we'd love to see more of that. And it's not just travellers. I think people can get very caught up with, as I said before, labels. So we see it a lot at work where some students have learning challenges, but they don't want to actually declare that because they see that as something that will go against them, instead of saying, no, this is something that will, by declaring it, I'm going to get more supports. But I think it goes back to the point that Lizette was making about, looking at our courses and looking at how we're assessing courses and all of that, and the universal design for learning. Because if we had a system in place whereby the students hadn't to ask for as much help, then they may not be feeling this way. And similarly, if we had an openness in our culture, in our mindsets, where we weren't judging of somebody regardless of whether they had a prison sentence or regardless of where they came from or whether they were a traveller or not, then people mightn't be afraid to disclose it. But there is a fear, and it's a cultural thing, and I think it's something culturally that we need to overcome ourselves. And once we overcome it, then we really overcome that obstacle for future learners.
Sure, okay, thank you for that. I'm not sure, Liz, if you have anything to add on that, or there are a couple of burning questions on the audience as well, so I might... Will we take... Okay. Yep, way down the back there. Can you... you might have to speak up quite loudly, so thank you.
Researching the different colleges, traditional and well-known colleges, the first barrier was the international fee that actually mentioned that, which is really high for us here because we have no family here and we are working and studying at the same time. So my question is related for everyone. Do you really think traditional colleges or well-known colleges are open for these categories, student categories, like international ones?
Okay, thank you. I think Lizette might have some real strong personal experience around that, but we'll open it to everybody as well in terms of our current third level colleges, if that's what you're talking about. Are they appropriately open for international students in terms of the fee structures, but also in terms of recognising where they have come from with regard to language and their previous learning and their previous knowledge?
I know that it depends on countries in order to recognise your diploma. I think some countries diploma are not recognized, but like most of the country, you're able to kind of recognize and change your diploma into what kind of level it represents in the framework here. That's what I know so far. But like for international students, I feel that it always depends on the residency of the status residency that you're here for. For example, I don't know where you're from, but like if you have like if you came with a visa, a study visa, so that means like you will imply that like you came to Ireland by choice to study. So the state will kind of imply that you should pay the international fees. That would be the position of the state now. But like now, regarding, for example, when I was talking about the University of Sanctuary, that a lot of colleges are getting on board, it's about helping. It's like it's a scholarship that is towards helping people, migrants from who are in the asylum-seeking process or the protection process, to kind of get into third-level education, especially when they haven't done the 3 years, because there's a minimum of 3 years that you have to do in Ireland in order for you to qualify for the SUSI or even the other SS scheme that supports the migrants. So a lot of colleges are kind of seeing the gap that is in place, and they're introducing the College of Sanctuary to kind of cover this gap until then the state is doing something about it. Basically, I don't know if I did answer your question.
Yes, it's just, I wonder, because Denise also mentioned that sometimes people have fear to attend to, for example, the marine training, teaching them culture, because you don't know how they access. So it's just I wonder sometimes if these type of colleges are really open.
We are really open to all students. That's the very first thing. We're open to all students. And if you are interested into any colleges, the very first thing to do, I feel, is to kind of get in touch with the access officer in the college. They will be able to help you. I see Imra there.
I think so, kind of just an observation from Natalia's question that, colleges may have a culture of being open or developing that, but there's still structural issues in place, or the infrastructure around payment prevents students accessing. So potentially, and maybe the colleges are doing that, look at different ways of, implementing different payment plans, or different. I know there's a lot of grants, but grants often come in a lump sum of 3,000 or 5,000, which gets a student so far. It's not a rolling grant that carries a student the whole way through. But potentially if there is a different payment plans in place, or a system where students could go to education, and once they become employed, then that they can start paying back in certain installments over a plan over a few years. So, we could look at integrating that, and I think if there was something like that in place, it would enable people to enter colleges and stay.
And I think, in fairness, some colleges do have plans. I know in IEDT we do have plans in place, but I think, going back to Natalia as well, another thing is the barrier for international fees. So when we look at domestic fees, they're a lot lower than international fees. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at, because that's a financial barrier that I don't have the answer to at this point in time, but I know it is a huge difference in the fees of international students and domestic fees.
And I think some of the universities and colleges at least would say so much of this falls back to the financing model of the third level institutes, and then international students pay an awful lot of money, and then that money is used as core funding or central funding. Back in 1999, I worked with student unions for a couple of years, and when I talked to my students on programs here, and I explained, well, in addition to not having to pay fees, we also received, a lot of people received £1,590 as grant, and we were paying a very small percentage of that for our student accommodation, and I remember at the time organising and participating in a number of demonstrations against the fact that there was an introduction of a student charge of €250, which is now topping out at somewhere in the region of €3,000, and making the claim that fees will come back in through this vehicle, and it will have an impact on who's able to come into college and who's not, and then multiply that by 5 when it comes to international students. And it's a very significant barrier for people who are either wanting to move here to study or who are living here and are caught in particular pincer grips around, well, you don't fit into the model because you haven't been here for this amount of time or you haven't follow that mechanism. So.
And also to add to that as well, I agree with everything you're saying there. And what also happens as well in ebbs and flows is that whether it's wrong, the structure's wrong anyway. I don't agree with the way the structure of it is. It's very it excludes a lot of people, but it doesn't even stay the same. It actually changes. So the SUSI grant will tighten up based on what's kind of going on in relation to industry and the economy at the time outside of the educational institutions. If there's more jobs available in society, fees get tightened up with SUSI grants. So the more people get put off going to college and they go and get jobs. And if there's no jobs available, then the fees are loosened again, so people get people back into college again. That's very industry focused and economic focused, and that's not very student focused, or even individually means tested renting. I think there's a lot of great ideas there for payment plans and different, maybe student loans or whatever, ways of working around them. But it doesn't even stay the same. It keeps ebbs and flows based on industry and economy, which is also wrong.
Absolutely, and I think in the absence of structural change to all of that, a lot of the initiatives through what we're here today, I suppose, to talk about in terms of Dublin Learning City and 1916 bursaries and all of that, if there is anybody watching this afternoon or watching later on, and knows of someone who wants to participate and wants to, cross the Rubicon, if that's what it is, into third level, please make contact with any of the participants here or through the website to Dublin Learning City. I'm getting a nod from our tech support telling us, come on, you're wrapping it up. I haven't felt that hour passing at all. I hope people who've been participating and watching both online and here in the room have enjoyed it. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but just as importantly, I've learned a lot today, and that's what we are about. So I really would like to say a huge thank you to our three panelist contributors. They really have learned an awful lot. So thank you to Denise, to Lisette and to Christy for being open and frank and engaging and very kind of honest in what we've had a discussion. Thank you to our participants in the audience as well for your questions and your engagement. And thank you to everybody who has followed us online, and we hope maybe to get some feedback on this. And if you haven't already had a chance to look at some of the activities that are planned for later on today and for tomorrow, please do so and get involved in some of those and stay involved with Dublin Learning City as well. So with that, I'll finish up and say thank you very much.